7 years. 7 long years ago I woke up with that same stabbing ache running down my back, crawling into my bones. And for 7 years I told myself it was just age or maybe stress. But the day I installed that little camera, oh mercy, the moment I saw what Anthony was doing while I slept, I felt my whole world split open. Oh my dear. My name is Gertrude Miller, though most folks have always called me Gertie. I'm 74 years old and I'm finally ready after all these years to tell a story I've carried like a stone in my chest. I know many of you come here for comfort, for companionship, and for those quiet evening stories that make you feel a little less alone. So before we begin, go on now, tap that like button, leave me a comment, tell me where you're listening from. And if you feel it in your heart, I'd love for you to join this little circle of ours. This story isn't easy. It isn't pretty. But it's the truth. Sometimes, the truth can set us free even after decades of silence. So let's begin at the beginning, back before the pain, before the confusion, back when my world still smelled of fresh laundry, lemon polish, and the kind of hope only young women believe in. I met Anthony Miller in the summer of 1967, one of those golden summers where the days stretched on forever, and the nights carried the scent of honeysuckle. I was working at a small bakery on Hawthorne Street back then, a tight little shop with pink-striped awnings and pastries that made people close their eyes when they took a bite. Anthony walked in wearing a white button-up, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine. He had this way of smiling with only half his mouth, like he was letting you in on a secret. He bought a cinnamon roll, then another the next day, then a dozen by the end of the week for the guys at work. Though I knew good and well he hardly shared a crumb. We courted slow. Walks by the river. Evenings spent listening to records. He always smelled faintly of cedar from the cologne he favored, and I used to think that scent meant safety. We married in April of 1970, right when the daffodils were blooming thick and bright. In the years that followed we had 3 children, Annie, Michael and Bethany, each of them a world unto themselves. Our home on Birchwood Lane wasn't much, but it was alive. There were toys under sofas, laundry on lines, stews simmering on the stove. Anthony worked long hours and I kept the house humming with routines that made me feel rooted. Those were golden years. Or that's how they looked, before life started whispering its warnings. By the late 70s our life had a steady rhythm. The kind of predictable comfort you don't even notice until it's gone. I'd wake early, open the windows, let the crisp morning air drift across the kitchen. The curtains would sway like they were dancing just for me. Anthony would come downstairs rubbing sleep from his eyes, always pretending he wasn't tired. He'd kiss my cheek, I'd pour him coffee, and the children would come stumbling in with messy hair and sleepy grins. Looking back, there were little things, small, strange things that only make sense now. The way Anthony sometimes watched me too closely. The way he insisted he sleep closest to the door. The comments about my restless sleeping, even though I had never been a restless sleeper. But I was young and trusting. I chalked everything up to work stress or moodiness or the simple wear and tear of life. The pain hadn't started yet. Not the deep, morning agony that would years later become a mystery I couldn't solve. For now, I slept peacefully beside the man I loved, never imagining that the truth was already creeping toward me in the dark. The pain began quietly, like a soft knock on a door you don't think is meant for you. I remember the very first morning vividly, though at the time it didn't seem like the start of anything. It was late autumn of 1978. When the air outside smelled of chimney smoke and wet leaves and the evenings drew in early. I woke before dawn as I always did, but something felt wrong. A sharp, twisting ache ran down the left side of my spine, settling into my hips like a weight someone had pressed into me with their bare hands. I tried stretching, rolling my shoulders, even whispering a little prayer under my breath. The pain lingered but eased after an hour or so, and I convinced myself it was nothing more than sleeping funny on a cold night. But pain has a way of returning once it finds a home. A few days later I woke with the same ache, only deeper. It felt like someone had pressed a thumb into the small of my back while I slept and held it there until morning. I tried hot cloths, home remedies, even a little liniment rubbed in by Anthony, who sighed like it was a bother but still did it. I didn't think much of his sighs then. I was used to his moods, used to him coming home tired and expecting the world to settle itself around him. And so I brushed it off. Women in those days brushed so much off: pain, exhaustion, worry. We were taught to believe things would settle on their own if we just stayed quiet enough. But the pain didn't settle. It grew. Over the next months, mornings became battles. I'd swing my legs out of bed only to have a jolt shoot up my back hard enough to steal the breath from my lungs. Some mornings I'd grip the edge of the mattress until the feeling passed. Other mornings I'd shuffle to the kitchen and lean against the counter, waiting for the kettle to boil while the ache throbbed deep inside me. By the time 1979 rolled in, I'd begun to dread sleeping. Nights that once felt warm and safe beside my husband started to feel like storms I had to brace myself for. But the confusion of it, that was the worst part. Pain without reason gnaws at your mind just as much as your body. It was during this time that Anthony began acting strange. The first odd thing happened one chilly evening in February. I had gone to bed early because the pain had been particularly sharp that day. I remember lying there half awake when I heard rustling near my dresser. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate sound like someone opening drawers with slow hands. I called out, thinking it was one of the children, but there was no answer. The rustling stopped immediately. When Anthony finally came to bed, maybe 10 minutes later, he smelled faintly of cold air, like he'd been standing in a draft. "Were you in here earlier?" I asked. He froze only a second, just a second, but enough for me to notice. "Just checking on you," he said. "You've been tossing around lately." I wanted to believe him. And I did, because believing your husband feels easier than questioning your reality. But a thin thread of unease wrapped itself around my heart that night, though I didn't yet have words for it. A few weeks later, I found the first clue. It was a little white envelope, tucked beneath the corner of our mattress as I was changing the sheets. It wasn't sealed, but the flap was pressed down neatly. Inside were three things: a small key, a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled on it, and a date, April 19th. No name. No explanation. When I held that envelope in my hand, I felt a chill move through me so sharply I almost dropped it. Something about it felt personal, secretive, and wrong. When I asked Anthony about it that evening, he barely looked up from his dinner. "Probably nothing," he muttered. "Old paperwork from the station. Don't worry yourself." His tone was dismissive, too dismissive. But I was raised to keep peace in the home, not stir it. I tucked the envelope into my bedside drawer and told myself to forget it. But I didn't. The first truly frightening symptom happened in early spring. I woke one morning unable to move my right arm for several minutes, completely numb from shoulder to fingertips. I cried out, which startled Anthony awake. He sat up slowly, blinking, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong with you now?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. The coldness in his voice cut deeper than the pain. I told him my arm wouldn't move, that something was terribly wrong. He sighed, another sigh, heavy and impatient, and told me to stop overreacting. He got out of bed without even touching my arm, without even looking at me properly. He showered, dressed, and left for work while I sat alone in bed waiting for the feeling to return to my fingers. By the time I could move my arm again, humiliation had settled thick in my chest. I began to question myself. Was I imagining the pain? Was it stress? A failing body? Women in my generation were told so often that discomfort was just something we had to live with, that I started to absorb the idea like gospel. But late at night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I kept remembering that rustling sound near my dresser, the envelope beneath the mattress, the odd way Anthony watched me sometimes as I drifted into sleep. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke suddenly. Not from pain, just a sense of something being off. The room was silent. Too silent. Anthony was lying beside me, but his breathing, it wasn't the steady rhythm I'd grown used to over the years. It was controlled, measured, almost like he was pretending to be asleep. A chill crawled across my skin. My instincts whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. I turned my head slowly, hardly daring to move, and saw the faintest glint of light reflecting off his open eyes in the darkness. He closed them the moment he realized I was awake. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. But from that night on, fear began weaving itself into my mornings just as tightly as the unexplained pain. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, that the man I married, the father of my children, could not possibly be the cause of the dread growing inside me. But I had begun to sense it. A shift. A shadow. A truth waiting to step into the light. And the first true suspicion, small but sharp as a needle, lodged itself deep inside my heart. The spring of 1980 arrived warmer than usual, the kind of spring where the earth itself felt restless. Flowers bloomed early, the air stayed heavy with humidity, and thunderstorms rolled through town with deeper rumbles than I remembered from years past. I often thought that the world outside was mirroring the unsettled feeling inside my own home, a tension thick as the charged air before lightning strikes. My pain continued to grow more unpredictable, appearing each morning with no clear pattern. Some days it felt like a deep bruise inside my ribs. Other days it was a throbbing ache between my shoulder blades that made it hard to take a full breath. And sometimes it was so sharp I pressed a hand over my stomach to keep from doubling over. But what troubled me more than the pain itself was the slow, steady shift in Anthony's behavior. He had begun staying up later than usual. Normally, he'd fall asleep quickly after a long day of work, drifting off before I had even finished reading my evening Bible passage. But now he lay awake long after I closed my eyes, sometimes pretending to read the newspaper, other times simply staring at the ceiling with a distant look. A few times I opened my eyes in the middle of the night and found him sitting on the very edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head bowed as if weighed down by thoughts he'd never share. When I asked him if something was bothering him, he brushed me off. "Work," he'd say. "Just work." But there was something in his tone, flat, rehearsed, that didn't sit right with me. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, I came downstairs from folding laundry and found him sitting in the dark living room. No television. No lights. Just him, sitting perfectly still on the sofa like a shadow cut from the room itself. "Anthony," I whispered, startled. He didn't flinch. Didn't look up. Only after several seconds did he slowly lift his head and glance over his shoulder at me, his eyes reflecting what little streetlight came through the window. "You should be asleep," he murmured. There was no warmth in his voice. No affection. Just coldness. I stepped back without even meaning to. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. The next morning the pain was worse than ever. A stabbing burn stretched from my lower spine all the way to the back of my neck. I sat at the edge of the bed, breathing shallowly, trying to gather the strength to stand. Anthony was already up, already dressed, tying his boots with sharp, impatient gestures. "You're getting dramatic again," he muttered when he saw me. "If you didn't toss and thrash all night, maybe you wouldn't wake up hurting." "I didn't toss," I whispered. "I hardly moved." He didn't reply. Just pulled his boots tight and left the bedroom with heavy steps. That day, a quiet question settled in my mind, one I tried hard to push away. Why is he always awake before I am now? And why does he always seem irritated in the morning, as if he's the one whose sleep was disturbed? Over the next week, more things began piling up, small things, but together they painted an unsettling picture. One afternoon while organizing the hall closet, I came across a torn piece of paper tucked behind a box of Christmas decorations. The handwriting was unmistakably Anthony's. It was slanted, hurried, the same handwriting he used for grocery lists. On the paper, only a short message was written. "Remember, 1:45 a.m. No date. No explanation. That night, I lay awake long after the children were asleep. I waited, staring at the clock beside the bed, watching the glowing numbers inch closer to 1:45. My heart thudded in my chest the way it did in church when the preacher spoke of warnings and signs. At 1:44, Anthony shifted beside me. His breathing changed, slow, controlled, almost too even. At 1:45, he turned toward me. "Why are you still awake?" he asked softly. I nearly jumped. I hadn't moved. I hadn't made a sound. "I couldn't sleep," I whispered. His eyes lingered on me in the faint darkness, studying me, watching me in that way he'd begun doing lately, as though he was waiting for me to drift off again. "Try," he said. It didn't sound like encouragement. Sounded like an order. I shut my eyes, though fear tightened my chest so firmly I could hardly breathe. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. And when I woke, the pain was so sharp it made me cry out. I felt it instantly. Something had happened during the night. Something unseen. Something that didn't feel like natural pain. By this point, the dread was becoming heavier than the pain itself. A few days later, I found another clue. It was late afternoon when a strange phone call came through. The phone rang twice, then stopped abruptly before I could answer it. When I approached the receiver, the line was silent, dead. But the moment I hung up, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow. Measured. Anthony wasn't supposed to be home. My heart leapt into my throat. I crept up the stairs, calling his name softly. When I reached our bedroom, he was standing near the window looking out at the street. "You're home early," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't turn around. "No reason to stay late," he uttered. His voice sounded low, almost rehearsed. "What about the phone?" I asked carefully. "Someone called but didn't speak." He stiffened. His fingers tightened on the windowsill. "Telemarketer," he replied too quickly. "Happens all the time." But something flickered in his expression when he finally turned to face me, something defensive, almost angry. I stepped back instinctively, as if my body understood something before my mind could catch up. That night, I lay in bed fully awake long after Anthony fell into what looked like a shallow, watchful sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the old house, feeling a storm building in my chest. The pain, the clues, the watching, the odd hours, the empty explanations. Every thread was tightening into a knot I could no longer ignore. I began to wonder if something was happening in those hours I couldn't remember, something hidden in the darkness between falling asleep and waking up. Something that might explain everything. And though I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that whatever was happening while I slept. And that Anthony knew far more about it than he would ever admit. The summer of 1980 arrived with a heat so thick it clung to the skin like damp cloth. Cicadas screamed from the trees every evening, windows stayed open at night, and even the moon seemed to hang lower, heavy and yellow as butter. Yet despite the warmth, I felt cold inside. The dread that had been following me, growing, thickening, no longer felt like imagination. It felt like a shadow attached to my ankles, following me room to room. One morning the pain was so intense I could barely stand. It felt as though every joint along my spine had stiffened while I slept. As I leaned against the bathroom sink, trying to steady the trembling in my hands, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, pale, weary, eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. I whispered aloud, "What's happening to me?" saying it made everything real. Too real. That day I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to school. The house was quiet still. My thoughts, however, were loud. I kept turning over every strange moment from the past year. The envelope, the nighttime rustling, the strange phone call, the eerie way Anthony watched me in the dark, the mornings filled with pain I couldn't explain. And beneath it all was a simple, terrifying truth I had avoided. Something was happening while I slept. Something I wasn't awake to see. I needed answers, real answers, not the dismissive scraps Anthony tossed my way. And I knew, deep in my bones, that asking him would only push him further into silence or anger. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I decided to watch myself sleeping. It began as a whisper of an idea, one I pushed away at first because it felt absurd, even shameful. But desperation has a way of stripping fear from a woman's heart. I needed to know the truth even if it frightened me. The question was how. This was long before modern home cameras, long before small silent devices you could tuck neatly into a corner. Back then, anything that recorded video was bulky, expensive, awkward. But I knew who to ask. Our neighbor, Mr. Harris, 2 houses down, had a son named David who was around 18 and a hobbyist with electronics. He tinkered in their garage, building radios, fixing old projectors, and taking apart televisions for fun. I baked him a plate of lemon bars and walked over one early afternoon. "David," I said gently, "I was hoping you could help me with something unusual." He blinked, wiping grease off his hands. "Sure, Mrs. Miller. What do you need?" I swallowed hard. "I'd like to borrow a camera. One that can record at night." He raised his eyebrows but didn't pry. He had always been kind that way, never asking more than a person volunteered. "Well, I have an old VHS recorder. The kind people use for school projects. It's noisy though. And the tape won't last more than a few hours." "That's okay," I murmured. "A few hours is better than nothing." He nodded and said he'd bring it by the next day. As I walked home with the empty lemon bar plate against my hip, shame bubbled in my chest. Not shame for wanting answers, but shame that I had become a woman who needed to spy inside her own bedroom. That night, guilt swirled around me like smoke as I lay beside Anthony. His breathing was steady, rhythmic, almost too controlled. I wondered, not for the first time, if he was awake beneath the performance. Watching me. Waiting. My heart hammered so loudly I worried he could hear it. When David came the next day with the recorder, he carried it inside like a fragile baby. "It's old," he warned. "You'll have to hide it behind something or it'll be noticeable." I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, dear. Truly." Once he left, I closed the bedroom door and stood there for a long moment, staring at the space where I slept each night. The room felt different, darker somehow, as if it held secrets pressing against the wallpaper. I placed the camera on the shelf of my tall dresser and stacked a couple of folded sweaters beside it to disguise its presence. The lens peeked out just enough to catch the edge of the bed. A test recording confirmed the view, a grainy but workable picture. I felt both relieved and terrified. That night, as I prepared for bed, I forced myself to behave naturally. Anthony watched me brush my hair in the mirror. There was something in his eyes, calculating, cold, that made my hand tremble. "What's wrong with you now?" he asked suddenly. I forced a smile. "Just tired." He stared a moment longer, as if trying to peel the truth off my skin before turning away. We climbed into bed. The house creaked. My heart pounded. I lay as still as possible, counting my breaths, waiting to feel his shift beside me, waiting for morning, waiting for... I didn't know what. At some point, exhaustion swallowed me whole. I woke before dawn with that same deep, bruising ache along my spine, worse than usual. Tears stung my eyes. My body felt heavy, drained, as if I'd been carrying something enormous all night long. Anthony was already out of bed, the sheets cool where he had slept. I moved slowly, wincing with each step, and reached for the VHS recorder. My hands shook so much I nearly dropped it. I locked myself in the bathroom, heart thudding, and played the tape. The footage was grainy, the colors washed out, but the image was clear enough. Me asleep under the thin summer sheets. My chest rising and falling slowly in the night. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. Then, at a little after 2 a.m., the camera caught a movement, slow, deliberate, from the left side of the bed. Anthony sat up. The motion was stiff, eerie. He didn't stretch or yawn or rub his eyes. He simply sat up with his back unervingly straight. I felt my stomach twist. He turned toward me and leaned slightly, watching me. Watching my unconscious body with a focus that sent chills crawling up my skin. Then, after several minutes of stillness, he moved again, leaning closer, reaching toward me with a deliberate slowness that made my breath catch. The tape cut to static halfway through the movement. The old machine had run out of tape. I sat there on the bathroom floor, the recorder heavy in my lap, trembling so violently I had to press my hand against my chest to steady myself. The pain in my back, the creeping dread, the strange nights, the clues, they all converged into a truth I could no longer deny. Anthony was doing something in the night. Something he didn't want me to know. And the tape, even incomplete, confirmed it. But I didn't yet know what or why. All I knew was that this was only the beginning. And that to uncover the full truth I would need to keep watching. For the rest of that day my hands shook so badly I could barely button my blouse. The recorder sat on the kitchen table like a cursed object, humming faintly as the tape rewound. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to leap to life and reveal the rest of the truth on its own. But no. The tape had stopped exactly where Anthony's shadow leaned toward my sleeping body, his hand stretched out in a way that made my stomach curl. I needed more evidence. I needed clarity. One half of a movement on a grainy recording wasn't enough to understand what was happening. And despite the terror twisting inside me, there was a new, sharper feeling emerging too: determination. A woman only breaks so far before something harder forms in her place. That night, I spent hours pacing the living room while the children slept upstairs. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder with each second, echoing like distant footsteps. I thought of my mother, who had always told me, "Gertie, a woman's intuition is God's early warning system." How many times had I ignored those warnings? How many moments had I brushed aside because I didn't want to face what they implied? But now there was no ignoring the truth. When Anthony came home that evening, he was in a strangely good mood. He whistled softly as he set his keys on the table, his eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. The cheerfulness didn't comfort me, it terrified me. It felt like a mask freshly painted over something rotting underneath. "How was your day?" he asked, voice smooth. I swallowed hard. "Fine." He walked over, placed a hand on my back, right where the pain always settled, and rubbed slowly. The pressure sent a twinge of agony through me, and I flinched despite trying to stay still. "Still hurting?" he asked, almost sweetly. I nodded. "Maybe you should sleep earlier tonight," he murmured. "Get some real rest." The way he said rest made my stomach tighten. When he turned away, his expression changed just for a split second. A small, satisfied twitch of his mouth. I wasn't even sure I'd seen it. But oh, how my heart pounded at the possibility. That night, I told him I'd be up late preparing a lesson plan for the children's Sunday school group I volunteered with. It wasn't unusual enough to raise suspicion. He shrugged and went upstairs first. Once I heard him settle into bed, I quietly retrieved the camera from the dresser drawer. David had explained how to extend the recording time by lowering the frame rate, making the footage choppier but longer. I didn't care if it was choppy. I cared about what it captured. With shaking fingers, I placed the camera back on the dresser, angling it carefully. This time, I hid it even better, tucking a small lace doily over the top edge and propping a few old paperback books beside it. Only the smallest portion of the lens peeked out. When I finally slid into bed, Anthony's breathing seemed too steady, too deliberate. I closed my eyes and pretended to drift off quickly. Inside my heart was a frantic drum. It must have been hours before sleep finally pulled at my eyelids. And even then, I drifted in and out, hovering between awareness and exhaustion. At some point, I became vaguely aware of a shift on the mattress, the warmth of a presence hovering closer than usual, but I told myself not to react. Not yet. Not until I had the proof. When morning came, the pain was unbearable. I cried out, gripping the sheets so tightly my knuckles whitened. It felt like a deep, grinding agony in my shoulders and spine, as if someone had pressed something heavy against me through the night. Anthony stood near the door already dressed. "You really need to stop making such a fuss," he said, sighing as he picked up his jacket. "You're becoming dramatic, Gertrude. It isn't attractive." I stared at him, unable to speak. He left the room without another word. The moment the front door shut behind him, I scrambled to the dresser, grabbed the recorder and locked myself in the bathroom again. My hands trembled so hard I had to press the recorder against the counter to steady it as I pressed play. The footage began with me lying still, the room dim and quiet in the glow of the nightlight. For several minutes nothing moved. Then just after 1:30 a.m., Anthony sat up again. But this time the camera captured everything more clearly. He turned toward me, slowly, deliberately. His face was calm, too calm. His expression blank, almost lifeless. He leaned over my sleeping form, studying me with a look I couldn't understand. There was no affection in it. No concern. Just cold observation, like a man inspecting something fragile that belonged to him. My breath hitched as I watched. He reached toward me again. The footage grew grainy, but I could see his hand moving with unsettling precision toward my upper back. He didn't shake me awake. He didn't speak. He simply pressed something. I couldn't see what, against the back of my shoulder. My sleeping body shifted slightly, a small twitch. Not enough to wake me. Anthony's face remained expressionless as he adjusted his position, leaning closer over me. His movements were slow, methodical, practiced. Then the tape caught something that made my blood run cold. He looked directly toward the camera. Not by accident. Not a passing glance. He stared. Straight. As if he knew it was there. The recorder crackled. The image warped slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on that lens for a full, excruciating moment before he leaned back and settled calmly into bed again, as though nothing unusual had happened. My whole body went numb. He knew. He knew I was watching. Or he had suspected. And now, after this night, the truth was certain. Anthony wasn't simply acting strange. He wasn't merely tired, stressed, or secretive. He was doing something purposeful during the night, something that caused my pain without waking me, something he didn't want me to uncover. The tape didn't show the full mechanism. It didn't show what he used or how he caused the pain. But it showed enough. Enough for fear to settle inside me like ice. Enough to realize the man I married was no longer a husband, he was a threat. Enough for me to understand that whatever he was doing, it was only growing bolder. And now that he had looked straight into the camera, I knew the danger was far from over. It was only just beginning. I didn't leave the bathroom for nearly an hour. I sat on the cold tile floor with the recorder resting in my lap, staring at the tiny screen replaying Anthony's blank, chilling expression over and over. Each time his eyes lifted toward the lens, my stomach tightened until I felt sick. There was no doubt anymore, he wasn't sleepwalking and he wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he knew I might discover it. That realization hit me harder than the pain in my spine. When I finally stepped out of the bathroom, the house felt different. Too quiet. Too hollow. Even the sunlight spilling through the curtains seemed cold. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I'd ignored before. Anthony's jacket still hung on the hook by the door. His shoes sat neatly lined up beneath it. Everything looked normal, so painfully normal it made my throat tighten. But normal was a lie now. Later that afternoon, when the children returned from school, I forced a smile. They were too young, too innocent to carry the weight of what I'd discovered. They didn't need to know their grandfather was capable of whatever this was. I hugged them tighter than usual, inhaling the clean scent of their hair, grounding myself in the one piece of life that still felt real. "Grandma, are you okay?" Mary asked, her big brown eyes studying me carefully. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "Just a little tired." I promised myself I wouldn't cry in front of them. Not until I had answers. Not until I understood the full truth. That evening, as Anthony's car pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. The engine shut off, the door slammed, and his footsteps approached, steady, confident. Too confident. He walked in whistling the same pleasant tune he'd been humming the day before. "Evening, Gertrude," he said casually, placing his keys on the table. "How was your day?" I watched him carefully. It was fine. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good to hear. His behavior didn't match what I had seen on the tape. It was as if there were two versions of him. The one who drifted through the house during the day pretending everything was fine, and the one who moved through the night with unsettling purpose. As he walked into the living room, I found myself following him. My feet moved on their own, driven by a force between fear and fury. He settled into his favorite chair and opened the newspaper, acting like we were any ordinary couple ending an ordinary day. I couldn't take it anymore. "Anthony," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." He didn't look up. "About what?" My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my throat. "About last night." His fingers paused mid-turn of the page. Then he slowly folded the newspaper and placed it on his lap. Only then did he lift his eyes to mine. Something flickered there, recognition, annoyance, and something darker I didn't dare name. "What about last night, Gertrude?" The room suddenly felt colder. I swallowed hard. "I've been recording myself. At night." He stared at me calmly, too calmly. "Recording yourself," he repeated as if tasting the words. "Yes," I whispered, "because I needed to know why I keep waking up in pain." A slow breath escaped his lips. "And did your little experiment give you answers?" I hesitated. "It showed things." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. "And what things did you think you saw?" My pulse raced. "You got out of bed. You leaned over me. You did something to my back." I expected anger or denial or shock. Something human. But instead, Anthony simply sat there staring at me with an expression so empty it made my skin crawl. Then he said quietly, "You must have misinterpreted it." "I saw you," I insisted, my voice trembling. "On the tape. You looked at the camera." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. He blinked slowly. Once. Twice. "Where is it?" he asked. My throat went dry. "Where is what?" "The camera." His tone was calm. Too calm. Far too calm to be safe. "I took it down," I lied. "It needs new batteries." It was a terrible lie. A transparent lie. But it was the only thing I could come up with while my brain screamed warnings in every direction. Anthony leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "You've been very nervous lately, Gertrude. Very emotional. Maybe imagining things." I shook my head. "I'm not imagining anything." He sighed, almost disappointed. "You've always been suspicious. Even before the pain started. Always looking for problems where there were none." His words felt rehearsed. Like something he'd prepared in advance. Like he knew this moment would come. "Anthony," I whispered, "why are you doing this to me?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he could take apart piece by piece. "Doing what?" he asked softly. The denial was worse than an admission would have been. It was deliberate. Manipulative. Before I could speak again, the front door burst open and David walked in, holding a box of groceries. "Grandma, He stopped mid-sentence, sensing the tension instantly. His eyes darted between us. "Everything okay?" Anthony's expression changed instantly. He plastered on a warm smile and rose from his chair. "Everything's fine, son. Your grandmother's just tired." But David wasn't fooled. Not this time. He took a small step closer to me. Grandma. My voice trembled. I need to show you something later. Anthony's jaw tightened, just a tiny movement, but enough to expose the truth he was trying to hide. He knew. He understood. And now he sensed he was losing control. Gertrude, he said quietly, we'll continue this conversation later. He walked past us, heading toward the kitchen, but the tension he left behind lingered like a thick fog. David turned to me the moment Anthony disappeared around the corner. What happened? I clasped his hand. I have the recording. He knows I saw it. David's face paled. Grandma, we need to get you out of here. I nodded slowly, tears welling in my eyes. Because the truth was becoming painfully clear. Whatever Anthony was doing, whatever his reasons were, whatever darkness had grown inside him, I was no longer safe in my own home. And the worst, most terrifying part? Anthony knew I knew. And he wasn't going to stay calm for long. The moment Anthony walked into the kitchen that evening, I knew something had shifted in him. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a stillness, a tightening, like a storm gathering its strength behind thick clouds. He moved quietly, too quietly, as if he were listening for something. Listening for me. I could feel him watching from the corners of rooms, from behind half-closed doors, even when I pretended not to notice. Every step I took in that house felt like it echoed with danger. After David helped me finish the dishes, he leaned close and whispered, "We can't wait. We need a plan. Tonight." I didn't want to believe things were that serious. Even after everything I'd seen, a piece of me, the piece that had loved Anthony through years of marriage, through raising babies, through building a life, begged me to hope this was a misunderstanding. But hope, I was learning, could be a dangerous companion. David helped me upstairs, pretending he needed to borrow a hammer from the closet just so we could slip into my bedroom without Anthony growing suspicious. Once inside, he turned the lock gently, like a man handling a fragile secret. "Grandma," he said softly. I watched the tape again. The fear in his voice made my heart flutter painfully. And he hesitated just long enough for me to feel cold all over. "There's more footage. Not from last night. From before." I felt the world tilt. "Before." He nodded. "It didn't save right the first time, but when I checked the card I found older recordings. Weeks worth. You didn't just catch him once." I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling in my lap. "I knew something was wrong," I whispered, "but I didn't know it had been going on for that long." David knelt in front of me like he used to when he was a boy tying his shoes. "We're leaving tonight. You'll pack what you need and you're coming home with me." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "What about the children?" "They're staying at Mom's tonight," he said gently. "They'll be safe." Safe. A word that suddenly felt so precious it ached to hear it. But leaving wasn't simple, not for a woman of my generation. We didn't walk out of marriages. We didn't abandon homes. We endured. We prayed. We made do. But this was no longer about pride or vows or the storybook life I'd hoped to preserve. This was survival. As David gathered my important papers from the drawer, birth certificates, my mother's old locket, the envelope with the mysterious key, I packed what I could into a small overnight bag. My hands shook so badly I could hardly fold my nightgown. Each rustle of the fabric sounded too loud, too revealing. I kept imagining Anthony appearing in the doorway, asking in that quiet, dangerous tone, "What are you doing, Gertrude?" The thought alone made my knees weaken. Just as David zipped the bag shut, the doorknob rattled. We froze. "Gertrude." Anthony's voice floated through the wood, calm, too calm. "Why is the door locked?" My breath caught in my throat. David put one finger to his lips, urging silence. We stood motionless, barely daring to breathe. After a long pause, Anthony spoke again, his voice lower this time. "Open the door." Neither of us moved. The knob turned once more, harder this time. Metal scraped against the latch. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it through the door. Then just as suddenly his footsteps retreated down the hallway. David exhaled shakily. "We don't have much time." We crept downstairs like two shadows haunting the same house. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. The living room lights were still on, flickering faintly. Anthony was nowhere in sight. "Where is he?" I whispered. "I don't know," David murmured. "But we're going. Now." We made it to the kitchen, But just as David reached for the back door, a voice drifted from the darkness of the dining room. Going somewhere? Anthony stepped forward, leaning against the doorway as casually as if he were inquiring about the weather. But his eyes, those eyes that once looked at me with warmth, now held something cold and calculating. Mom called, he said slowly. Said the kids were dropped off early. Funny, isn't it? David stiffened. His jaw clenched. We're leaving, Dad. Anthony's smile was thin, razor-sharp. Leaving? At this hour? With her bag packed. My hands tightened around the strap of my purse. My voice trembled, but I forced words out. Anthony, I don't feel safe here. His expression shifted just slightly. A flicker of something almost wounded, almost insulted. But beneath it, something else. Something frightening. You don't feel safe with your own husband? He asked softly. He stepped closer. David instinctively stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. Yes, David said firmly. That's exactly what she's saying. The room pulsed with tension. Every second felt stretched, elongated, ready to snap. Then Anthony's jaw hardened. Give me the camera. My blood froze. What? You heard me, he said quietly. The camera. The recordings. Give them to me. That's not happening, David replied. Anthony's eyes moved to me, cold and piercing. You've been sneaking around behind my back. Spying on me. Betraying me. Betraying. I whispered. Anthony, I woke up in pain every morning for 7 years. I needed answers. You needed to trust your husband, he snapped. The sudden shift in his tone made my knees buckle. David steadied me. Then something shifted, something small but unmistakable. A twitch in Anthony's jaw. A flash of panic. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't yet dared to imagine. He wasn't angry I'd accused him. He was terrified I had proof. David's voice was calm but firm. We're leaving now. If you try to stop us, I'll call the police. For a moment, none of us moved. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each painfully slow second. Then Anthony stepped backward just slightly, retreating into the shadowed doorway. You'll regret this, he murmured. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise soaked in bitterness. But David didn't hesitate. He grabbed my hand, pushed open the back door, and led me into the cool night air. The moment my feet hit the grass, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. We didn't speak until we were safely inside David's car, doors locked, the house shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror. Only then did he turn to me, breath shaking. Grandma, there's something else. I looked at him, exhausted, frightened. What? He pulled the memory card from his pocket. On the last recording, he whispered, Dad didn't just stare at the camera. A chill rippled through me. He said something. My voice cracked. What did he say? David swallowed hard. He said, soon she won't even remember she's hurting. The words hit me like a physical blow. Because they didn't just reveal his actions. They revealed his intent. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood the full weight of the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. Anthony had known exactly what he was doing. And he planned to keep doing it. No matter the cost. The morning after we left, I awoke in David's guest bedroom to the unfamiliar hum of his refrigerator downstairs and the soft tick of a wall clock I'd never noticed before. For a moment, just a single, tender moment, I forgot everything. I stretched under the quilt, expecting the ache in my spine, bracing for it, waiting for that familiar stab of pain that had been my unwelcome companion for 7 long years. But when the pain didn't come, not even a whisper of it, I broke down crying. Not the loud, heaving sobs of shock or anger, but the kind that flow silently like a release long overdue. David found me like that, sitting on the edge of the bed gripping the blanket, my face wet with tears I hadn't planned to shed. Grandma, he asked gently. I don't hurt, I whispered. For the first time in years, I don't hurt. He sat beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him the way I used to when he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. But this time the storm was inside me. The day was a blur of decisions, each heavier than the last. David insisted we go to the doctor first to check my back, my nerves, everything. The doctor, a kind woman with warm eyes, ran her tests and found nothing alarming. It could have been stress, she said softly. chronic tension, sleep-related strain. A gentle way of saying, your body was crying out for help and you didn't listen until now. I thanked her, though my heart felt hollow. The second stop was the police station. I trembled as we walked inside. Even then, I still didn't want to believe Anthony had meant harm. I still wanted a softer explanation, something easier to swallow. But when the officer asked what we were reporting, my voice didn't shake with doubt, it shook with certainty. I believe my husband has been doing something to me at night, I said quietly. For years. The police took the recordings, the notes, the evidence. They were calm, respectful, methodical. They didn't promise answers, but they took me seriously, which was more than I'd received at home. When we left, I felt lighter, though I wasn't sure if it was hope or exhaustion. Maybe both. In the days that followed, I stayed with David and his wife, letting the routine of their household wrap around me like a warm shawl. The children drew crayon pictures for me, flowers, houses, stick figure families holding hands. One drawing had 4 figures. Not 5. They'd already sensed the truth. Their grandfather wasn't coming back into the picture. I called my daughter next. My hands trembled as I held the phone. She answered on the second ring, cheerful at first, then quiet when she heard the heaviness in my breath. Mom? Is everything okay? No, I whispered. But I'm safe. She came over that evening, and when I told her everything, she didn't interrupt, didn't ask me to explain the parts that didn't make sense, didn't question why I'd waited so long. She simply held me and cried. By the end of the week, Anthony had attempted to call 3 times. I didn't answer once. The 4th time, I let the phone ring unanswered as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faded pattern on the tablecloth. David eventually unplugged the phone, muttering, "He doesn't get access to you anymore." It should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like grieving. Because even after everything, even after the camera, the confrontation, the danger, I mourned the man I thought I'd married. The man he used to be. The man he pretended to be. That is one of the hardest lessons age teaches you. Sometimes the person you love doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes they fade through 1,000 small betrayals you're too hopeful to notice. Eventually, the police contacted us. They couldn't share everything, but they said enough. Evidence supported my concerns. Enough inconsistencies, enough suspicious behavior, enough recordings to open an official case. It wasn't the vindication I expected. Instead, it felt bittersweet, like confirmation that the life I'd been clinging to had never been as whole as I believed. The following weeks were filled with paperwork, things women of my generation were never trained to handle alone. Bank accounts, insurance documents, legal forms. My hands ached from signing my name over and over, as if reclaiming my life required physical proof. David helped with everything, patient and protective. My daughter helped too, cooking meals, setting out warm blankets, bringing flowers to brighten the room. But even with their support, I felt weighed down by shame. How had I not known? How had I lived beside a man capable of such coldness? For a while I blamed myself. I blamed my softness, my trust, my belief in loyalty above all else. But one afternoon, while sitting on David's porch watching a thin stream of smoke curl from a neighbor's chimney, I realized something. My softness was not my failure. His choices were his. Mine were mine. That realization became the first brick in the new foundation of my life. Once the initial shock faded, I faced practical decisions: where to live, how to support myself, how to rebuild. I decided I didn't want to return to the old house. Too many memories lingered in the wallpaper, in the corners, in the silence. So I moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from David's home, a cozy place with sunlight in the mornings and a little kitchen where I could bake bread again. My daughter painted the walls a soft cream color. The grandchildren helped unpack my boxes, squealing with delight when they found old photo albums. Piece by piece, I rebuilt my independence. I learned to manage my own finances. I took a part-time job at a local craft store, a place that smelled of paint, wood, and warm cinnamon potpourri. The women there welcomed me like an old friend. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, it began to feel like home. The nights were hardest at first. Each creak of the floorboards made my heart spike. Each flicker of the streetlight through the curtains set my nerves humming. But over time the fear softened. The shadows became just shadows. The silence became peace. And my pain stayed gone. I found joy in small things again, in tea with my daughter, in reading with my grandchildren, in crocheting blankets for the church nursery. My world grew warm once more. Not perfect. Not the same, but warm. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset paint the sky peach and gold, I placed a hand against my back and felt nothing, no ache, no sting, no tension. Just freedom. And in that quiet, glowing moment, I whispered a promise to myself. I may have lost nearly everything, but I did not lose me. I have always believed that life changes in quiet moments, not loud ones. Not during the screaming matches, the slammed doors, the confrontations that leave hearts bruised and voices hoarse. No, true transformation begins in the spaces between breaths, when we finally allow ourselves to soften, to listen inwardly, to acknowledge that the woman we have been is not the woman we must remain. That realization came to me during my first week living alone, when the world felt both frighteningly large and strangely new, like an empty page waiting for ink. I remember waking before dawn, the sky still the color of faded denim, and sitting in my little living room with a cup of tea warming my hands. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm oddly comforting. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere to rush, no table to set, no breakfast to prepare for someone who no longer deserved my care. And there, in the gentle hush of the early morning, something inside me shifted. I thought of my younger self then, sweet, naive, eager to please everyone, believing that good wives endured, forgave, stayed quiet, and carried burdens without complaint. I saw the girl who had married Anthony all those years ago, the woman who had raised babies with tired hands, cooked meals on tight budgets, folded laundry late into the night, and believed love was supposed to be difficult. I saw myself through the decades, moving through rooms with quiet purpose, convincing myself that my aches were normal, that my exhaustion was a badge of honor, that my marriage was ordinary because all marriages had hidden cracks. And then I saw myself now, wrinkled, wiser, tender from hurt but not broken, and I realized I had been asleep for far too long. The days that followed were filled with small awakenings. I discovered I loved the sound of morning birds, something I'd never heard properly because Anthony always left the radio on. I realized I enjoyed breakfast alone, slow, unhurried, with toast lightly buttered rather than rushed and burned. I found that silence, once frightening, was actually comforting, like a soft blanket I could wrap around myself. For years I had been afraid of being alone. Now I began to savor it. In those early weeks, I spent a lot of time sorting through boxes I'd brought to the new apartment. They were filled with pieces of my life, old photographs, birthday cards from the children, newspaper clippings, outdated receipts, crocheted blankets from my mother, and tiny treasures that somehow survived decades of moving and cleaning. Each item told a story. Some brought me joy, some brought me grief. But with every memory I touched, I learned something about the woman I had become. The truth was simple. I had been strong far longer than I realized. One afternoon, while digging through a box of old letters, I found a small photograph of myself at 21, standing beside a car with a scarf tied in my hair. I was laughing, truly laughing, with sunshine on my face and not a single wrinkle of worry on my brow. The sight of that girl made my heart ache in the sweetest way because I realized I wanted to know her again. I wanted to feel her carefree spirit, her innocent hope, her belief that the world was a place built for wonder. It made me realize that my journey wasn't just about escaping pain. It was about returning to pieces of myself I had forgotten existed. Slowly I began building a life that felt like mine. I filled my home with plants, ferns, African violets, a fiddle leaf fig that my grandchildren insisted I name. I settled on Winnie. I decorated the walls with framed family photos and vintage artwork from thrift stores. I placed a basket of yarn beside my favorite chair and crocheted blankets in soft colors that reminded me of sunrise. The apartment became warm, cozy, a reflection of the softness I'd rediscovered within myself. And then something wonderful happened, something I never expected. I started feeling excited about the future. Yes, the future at my age. I picked up my old hobbies again. I baked bread every Sunday, filling the apartment with the comforting smell of yeast and warmth. I attended a quilting group at the local community center, where women my age laughed loudly and spoke freely, something I'd forgotten women could do. I watched the grandchildren after school sometimes, and their chatter filled the rooms with life. I joined a support group recommended by my doctor, women who had left difficult marriages, women who had survived emotional storms, women who understood what it meant to rebuild from the ashes. With them, I found empathy, sisterhood, and the reassurance that I wasn't alone. Every week I grew stronger. My shoulders relaxed. My breath deepened. My smile returned. And my pain, my mysterious, daily, cruel pain, remained gone, as if it had been waiting for my spirit to wake up. But healing isn't linear. Some nights were hard. Some nights I lay awake replaying the past, wondering how things had gone so wrong, how I had missed the signs, why I had trusted for so long. My mind wandered to the younger versions of myself, all the times I brushed off the sharp pains, the strange mornings, the moments of confusion. I remembered how Anthony's sighs had made me feel small, how he dismissed my concerns, how he looked at me with cold eyes that once held tenderness. I grieved not just for the years I'd lost, but for the woman I had been forced to become in order to survive. There were moments when guilt crept in, whispering that I should have left earlier or noticed sooner or stood up for myself more. But each time that guilt tried to anchor itself in my heart, I reminded myself of something crucial. I had done the best I could with the tools I had at the time. Women of my generation were taught to endure, not to question, to stay, not to run, to hope, not to investigate. And for all my flaws, I had finally chosen freedom. That choice mattered more than the years before it. Months passed, and with each one, my world expanded. I found joy in routine, watering plants, chatting with neighbors, attending church potlucks, walking slowly through the farmer's market with a basket hooked over my arm. The seasons changed, and I changed with them. Autumn brought crisp air and cozy sweaters. Winter brought quiet evenings with tea and blankets wrapped around my shoulders. Spring brought flowers, new beginnings, and a sense of renewal. And summer, sweet, warm summer, brought light into places inside me I thought would never thaw. One warm afternoon, I sat on a bench outside the craft store where I'd taken a small job. The sun warmed my face. Children laughed in the distance. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby maple tree. I felt a sense of peace so deep it startled me. And I realized something important. I was no longer surviving. I was living. My transformation continued in countless small ways. I learned new things: how to use email, how to video chat, how to grow tomatoes in pots, how to bake cinnamon bread that made the neighbors wander into the hallway just to ask what smelled so delicious. I signed up for a watercolor painting class and found joy in every messy stroke. I began journaling again, filling page after page with memories, thoughts, dreams, and reflections. It felt like opening windows in a house that had been closed for far too long. One evening, while sorting through old belongings, I found the envelope with the small key that had once scared me so deeply. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight. Once that key had represented fear, something hidden, something secret, something dangerous. Now it felt like a reminder of how far I had come. I didn't need to know what it opened anymore. I didn't need answers to every question. The key no longer held power over me, I held power over myself. Over time, whispers about my separation reached old friends, acquaintances, and even distant relatives. Some were sympathetic. Some were shocked. Some were judgmental. But I found I didn't care as much as I once would have. Their opinions no longer controlled me. Their expectations no longer defined me. I was finally learning to define myself. Then came a moment I never expected, a phone call from my eldest granddaughter who said, "Grandma, I'm proud of you." Those words, spoken so simply and sincerely, settled into my heart like warm honey. Pride is something I had reserved for others, my children, my grandchildren, the people I loved and nurtured. I had never allowed myself to feel proud of me. But hearing those words from her made me realize something beautiful. Perhaps it was time. As the months turned into a full year since I left Anthony, I reflected often on the journey. I didn't hate him, though I thought for a while that I might. Hatred takes energy I didn't want to give. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Distance. Detachment. As if he were someone from a distant dream I had finally awakened from. Someone whose identity no longer intertwined with mine. Someone who had walked his own dark path while I'd found light on mine. One evening, while sitting at my kitchen table with the soft glow of a lamp illuminating my journal, I wrote something that surprised even me. I forgive him. Not because he deserved it. Not because it excused anything. But because forgiveness was freedom and I had worked too hard to carry chains again. The more I grew into my new life, the more I realized that my story didn't end with pain or betrayal. It blossomed into resilience, growth, and the quiet, steady miracle of rediscovery. I became not just a survivor but a woman reborn. A woman with hobbies, friendships, laughter, independence, and a home filled with warmth and peace. And now, as I sit here telling this story, my story, I want other women, especially those my age, to know something. It is never too late. Not too late to change your life. Not too late to begin again. Not too late to find joy. Not too late to reclaim your worth. Not too late to rediscover who you've always been beneath the layers of duty, sacrifice, and silence. I share this not to dwell on the darkness, but to shine a light for someone else who might still be navigating it. I am an old woman now, Gertrude Miller, 79 years of age, but I have learned more in the last year than I learned in the entire decade before it. And the greatest lesson of all is this: transformation is possible at any age. If you've listened this far, thank you. I hope my story gives you courage, hope, or even just a moment of comfort. And if it touched you, please like this video, leave me a little comment, or subscribe for more stories from a woman who finally found her voice. Because I am alive. I am healing. And my new beginning has only just begun.